Hello and welcome to North 100, a Canadian Highlander podcast. I'm Serge. Joining me as always, I have Jer, Alex, and Liam, who has released the beast once again today.
I don't know why you guys keep talking about that.
I love your hair. You're majestic. This episode is brought to you by you over at the Patreon at patreon.com/LoadingReadyRun. Thank you. We couldn't do this without you. Today, let's start off with the segment we always start out with, the best card you're not playing. Up today, Alex. Alex, tell me your super secret spicy tack.
So let me take you to a land called Undiscovered Paradise, which is an appropriate name for a best card you're not playing.
Love it. Very flavorful.
So this is from Visions.
Yes.
It comes in untap. Tap, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool.
Sounds good.
At the beginning of your next untap phase, return Undiscovered Paradise to your owner, into its owner's hands.
Bad.
This is a card that turns its supposed downside into an upside. So the way this works is that if you activate that ability, the next upkeep it bounces. But if you leave it in play, it will stay there. So first of all, it fixes for any color. It's a rainbow land that doesn't like dome you like Mana Confluence or City of Brass or anything like that. The returning to your hand clause would be a drawback, and in many decks is. But think about this. You can use this to re-trigger a number of abilities. Revolt.
Because it returns
on your upkeep. It bounces to your hand and triggers Revolt. You can make if you tap this every turn, you can get landfall every turn off of it.
I don't. The thing that I was thinking about this, if you're an aggro deck and you're missing your land drops, if you're not counting.
Well, you're bricked anyway.
Yeah,
but
like,
it gets better. It plays around back to basics. Because you tap it, and if they go back to basics, it bounces to your hand. You can play it untapped again.
Okay, that's spicy.
What happens if they Blood Moon you? It doesn't come back, right?
It's just a mountain.
I actually think it does.
No,
it's just a mountain, right?
If you've
But
already,
if you've
already
tapped it and then they Blood Moon, it returns to your hand, and then you play it as a mountain. One other card that this plays nice with is Winter Orb. Make your land drops. So I play this in 2 to 3 color aggro decks. Like
or more,
really, or more, yeah. Like low the ground. Like I played in 4-color humans.
Yeah.
Because fixing to any color is great. It comes in untap. That's great.
And all that other upside you're mentioning before.
It's a little sketchy to play as like your first land. And sometimes it'll be sometimes you'll be playing
a little sketchy, he says.
Usually
sometimes
it's
works.
the last land you play out of your hand, unless you really need a color.
Yeah, sometimes you're using it to fix in a pinch.
Cool.
And I'm not going to tell you that it isn't going to be awkward sometimes, but a lot of the time you'll be surprised by how good this is.
No, that's cool.
It's also not expensive. I think this card's like $7 or something.
Sick.
But I love it. I think
Also comes in gold border.
It does.
If you really
Sadly.
want an even more discounted version of this card, sick. Well, thank you very much, Alex. No, this is a great card and criminally underrepresented in the format right now.
Yeah.
Maybe not criminally, but definitely underplayed.
It's a crime. That's fine.
Yeah.
All right, let's move. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just gonna say, as Alex mentioned, like the decks you want to see it in are mostly aggro decks, where like it doesn't really matter if you just replay your 4th land over and over again. Yeah.
Let's move on to today's theme. If you've read the YouTube title, this isn't going to be a surprise. It's control. Let's talk about control. And to start us off, we're going to need a definition of control in Highlander and how it differs from other formats. And as always, Jer, teach us about control and give us a definition to start with.
So control in general in Magic is a strategy where you're fundamentally trying to stymie your opponent's game plan and then enact yours, which usually the proactive part of your game plan doesn't start until much later in the game.
Yeah.
And this is much harder to do in Eternal formats. Like in Vintage, there's not really any true control decks. They play out more like tempo decks or mid-range decks. In Legacy, you sort of had control for a while with Miracles, and now sort of whatever Miracles has become, it's not as good as it once was.
They still play Miracles, but it's not as miraculous.
Yeah, because they got rid of, what was that?
Sensei's Top.
Oh, right, yeah.
And so in Highlander, control decks usually are most traditionally either blue or black based, and either try to counter all your stuff or kill all your stuff, then start playing their stuff.
So for a very high-level discussion, we've broken control down into 3 categories. We have reactive decks, tap out control decks, and then prison decks. This is just going to be a start, and we can dive way down into it. But at a high level, those are the 3 types that we thought sort of summarized control in Highlander. Liam, tell us about reactive control decks.
Yeah, so this is probably the type of control deck that I think most people think of when they think control strategy. This is like your blue-white, your blue-black, whatever, where they're going to not tap a land on their main phase for the first 9 turns of the game. They're going to counter every spell you play, or like ideally you're going to counter every spell. Yeah, you're going to cast a lot of counter spells, less mana drains these days. Mana drain just got pointed for those unaware. But anyway, you're going to cast a bunch of counter spells, and then eventually, once you've traded a bunch of resources off, you'll play some kind of card advantage spell like Sphinx's Revelation, maybe a Glimmer of Genius, something like that.
Yeah.
Factor fiction.
Factor
really
fiction.
far ahead.
Right. So you're going to interact on the stack for most of the time, and then eventually, after you've interacted on the stack, you've drawn a bunch of cards, you've exhausted most of your opponent's resources, you're going to play some kind of win condition, and that's probably the only time you're going to tap out in the entire game.
Yeah, maybe not even tap out when you play your win.
Right, yeah. You're going to like pay 5 mana
Yeah,
to
it's
play your
turn
thing.
14, you play a 6-drop, you've got 8 mana and 17 counter spells in hand. You know, that sort of game.
Yeah, you're just gonna like counter worm coil or
One-
like
Consecrated Sphinx is a good one.
You'll go shields down for 1 turn.
when you're not really shield
Half shields.
because they're out of swords.
Exactly, and the idea is that whatever your opponent can do, it's not going to be as good as the thing you just did, and then you go back to playing your thing versus their thing. You're probably going to kill their thing either immediately or next turn, and they're just going back to not resolving spells.
Yeah, so we assume a lot of people understand the reactive deck, because that's a very standard one. Alex, this is a little bit trickier. Tell us about tap-out control.
Tap-out control, we're talking about decks like mono black control, big red, green black, stuff like that. These ones will not hold up mana. They just look to keep you off your game plan, generally speaking, through removal. Like big red will play a bunch of board sweepers, or their first couple of turns.
Yeah,
their first couple turns will be like wiping out all aggro creatures that have been played against it, and then it plays like Inferno Titan, or like Grave Titan, or Massacre Worm.
Or Planeswalkers.
Yeah, that's what I was
Or
going to say.
Planeswalkers.
The thing that I think really characterizes the strategy is, and has made the strategy very good, is the advent of Planeswalkers and the continued printing of better and better Planeswalkers.
Yeah, definitely.
Right. Every time a new Planeswalker gets printed that's in black or green, Allison starts rubbing
Yeah,
her hands together and
like-
gets to cut another creature from her deck.
Allison's The Rock deck is a great example.
Yeah, because it ramps a little bit, it plays a little bit of hand attack to control your opponent's draws, blows up all creatures frequently, or sometimes all permanents, and then just like sticks some weird planeswalkers that nobody else plays, and yet they kill you. Like Nixilis of the Black Oath. You ever
Yeah.
lost to that card?
Sure have.
Yeah.
Sending across Allison, I think we all have, yeah.
Yep. Just like, okay.
Another really popular tap-out control deck that people don't necessarily immediately think of tap-out is Bant is often a tap-out deck. It's often a deck that plays green mana acceleration, white wraths, and sort of only plays blue for maybe like 1 or 2 counter spells, but largely for card draw. They'll like use it to fill up their hand.
Sounds like a good deck for Sphinx's Revelation.
Yeah, Sphinx's Rev. They'll often play the sorcery speed draw spells just because they're like traditionally more efficient and they're tapping out anyways. Like they're not set up to play at instant speed, and they'll just play
So like Thirst for Knowledge, or like
that's like the premier compulsive research deck in my
Yeah.
mind. Is like that is the deck to play compulsive research in.
It's also, or sorry, what were you?
Yeah, I was just going to talk about Bant a little bit more. That deck is like super powerful because of its ability to be a proactive control deck. Its ability to go like any ramp spell on 2 and then just start playing Planeswalkers for the rest of the game is like.
Well, I think that's the
really
idea
hard to
behind
beat.
the tap-out control deck, is it is proactive. It controls the deck by saying, I'm going to kill your stuff, and then you have to answer my stuff. I'm playing threats that you can't answer.
Yeah, it's really interesting though because it plays Planeswalkers, so it sort of incentivizes its opponents to commit more to the board to deal with the Planeswalker that you've played, and then you're just going to play a Wrath, kill all their creatures, and then your Planeswalkers just keep like making more creatures or
I got
doing what they do.
baited in a game. I was playing against what I thought was Jeskai midrange, but it was Jeskai control. and they played a Planeswalker, and I thought I knew the matchup, so I overextended, and then they wrathed me, and I was like, "What are you playing wraths for?" And they're like, "Oh,
Classic
haha,
Highlander.
this isn't the mid-range list. This is a control list that plays a lot of the really powerful cards in that deck."
Whoops.
It's important to note, too, that when we're talking about reactive and proactive control decks, or tap out and reactive, that the sort of like elements we're describing from each deck are not mutually exclusive.
Definitely
of
not.
course not.
So like even like the Bant deck that Jeremy's talking about plays counterspells. It's not as though the deck plays no counterspells, but it's the difference between a deck that's playing 20 counterspells and 10, right?
Or 4.
Right, or
Or
like
30.
or just 4 or
like
5.
Seinfeld.
Yeah.
But it's a sliding scale. It's very rare that you end up with a deck with no interaction and instant speed and a deck with only interaction and instant speed, right? There's always going to be a combination of the two, and really what we're talking about is which direction do you slant to more.
Yep.
So the final type of control is very close to my heart.
It's cold black heart.
It's Prison, Magic's most fun and interactive archetype. The point of Prison is to completely lock your opponent out. Let them do nothing.
You ever want to play a
archetype.
one-player game of Magic?
I'm the other one here who plays prisons.
Yeah. So yeah, the whole point about Prison is you spend the
This motive
first
is so
6
sick.
times trying your best not to die. You're trying to set up lock pieces where what you do is the game isn't over in the sense that a player hasn't lost, but the game is over in the sense that your opponent can no longer do anything. So a classic example of this would be something like Trinisphere, which is an artifact that all spells cost at least 3 mana. It's very weirdly worded, but let's just go with that definition for now. And then an effect like Armageddon to destroy all of their lands. So your opponent now can't do anything because they have less than 3 lands, but every spell costs at least 3 mana.
And you're sitting there with a bunch of mana rocks.
Yeah, and then you build your strategy around these symmetrical effects so that you don't end up in
It's right
a
there on the
situation where
card,
you're locked
Serge. It
out as
says
well.
balance.
Yeah, another classic but maybe weirder lock would be Chains of Mephistopheles and Anvil of Bogarden.
Oh, man.
For those keeping score at home, when Serge said fair, he was doing air quotes.
Well, I don't know that Serge knows what a fair Magic card is.
Fair.
Graham used air quotes.
Oh, dear.
Yeah, so in Chains Anvil combo, you're taking away your opponent's ability to have any cards in their hand for the rest of the game. So you have all these effects that try and remove a lot of the pieces of Magic that people are used to having.
Can you give us the short version of what that combo does? It just makes it so that they can't draw anymore.
Yeah,
right?
so Chain says if you would draw a card that's not the first card you've drawn this turn, instead you loot, and if you have no cards, you mill. And Anvil of Bogarden says in your draw step, loot.
Instead of mill, or
instead of
draw.
drawing.
No, you draw, and then you draw, then discard.
Yeah.
So Chains replaces the draw off Anvil of Bogarden with a draw, then discard, and then Anvil makes you discard, so you're drawing 2 cards and discarding 2 cards.
So you never.
So you just mill 2
Yeah,
every
so you're
time.
so you're
Well,
you're now net 0 cards per turn instead of net 1 card per turn.
So if you have 1 card in hand, normally on
see.
your turn
Yeah,
you'd
yeah,
go
yeah.
up to 2. But with Chains and Anvil in play, you only ever have 1. And as soon as you play that 1 card in your hand, you now have 0, and you can never draw another card for the rest of the game.
And the idea is the prison decks have ways to circumvent this
Yeah.
this lock by like cards like Outpost Siege that exile a card every turn and let you play that card, and it circumvents it because you're not drawing the card.
Or if you have something out of your graveyard that you can play. What's that 3 mana 2/2 creature in your graveyard?
Nether Spirit.
If you have a Nether Spirit or something. So Nether Spirit you don't cast, you don't care if it's in your hand, it
You
will
ever
just
want to
come
get
back.
chiseled to death by a 2/2?
Yeah. Yeah, or you just kill them with the Mistress Factory, which is another 2/2.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like Prison, like, makes the game so entirely unplayable that you just get there with a bear.
Yep.
Because it's the only thing left alive and the only thing that can do anything.
Yeah, this kind of bleeds into Pox strategies, which is very similar. It's hard to play pure Prison or pure Pox in Highlander, so they kind of bleed into each other.
Serge's wheelhouse.
Yeah. So anyways, our types of control, again, just to reiterate, is reactive, tap out, and prison. These are very, very high-level concepts. We don't want to get too much into individual ones or argue where a deck fits in either one. We just kind of want to talk about
These are the broadest strokes.
yeah, what it's like in there. And so now let's talk about what it's like to build a control deck in Highlander. And I think an important point if you want to build this deck is to know that not every control deck is great at a high level of Magic. We were talking about this earlier. Yeah, go ahead.
It's hard because fundamentally what the control decks are trying to do is stop your opponent's game plan first and foremost, no matter which type of control you're trying to employ, you need your goal is to first stop what they're doing, then enact your game plan.
Yep.
And so if you're not sure what your opponent's going to be trying to do, or your opponents are doing a very wide variety of things, it's very hard to plan to stop a wide variety of things or things you don't know.
Yeah.
Right, it would take some kind of deck full of charms with modal effects.
So I think
Sure.
an important
Hey, man.
starting point for this, thank you for getting my brain on the right track, is if you're building a control deck, you have to decide which archetype you want to prey on. So it's very different to build a control deck that kills creatures versus a control deck that kills combo. For example, Wrath of God. Wrath of God, great against creatures, terrible against combo. So, and both, a control deck doesn't have to play Wrath, but it does if you want to prey on the right deck. So what is your metagame? What is the, anything else you guys want to add on that one?
And so typically control decks will have elements that are good against each type of thing. Like you'll have some removal spells, you'll have some ways to deal with combo, you'll have like some ways to get ahead of mid-range decks and other control decks. And it's just sort of what ratios you want those to come in and like what tutors you want to play to determine like which cards you want to be able to find more often and which draw spells you want to play.
Yeah, you're often going to slant to one direction or another. Like in the same way that being reactive or tap out is sort of a sliding scale, not an absolute. You're never going to be a control deck. Well, I say never. You're very rarely going to be a control deck that's exclusively built to beat combo or
No, of course.
exclusively built to beat aggro. But you are going to slide one way or the other.
So I built control in the past, and if I know I'm going to run into goblins or elves, I'll be more likely to play 2 or 3 mana sweepers than I will be 4 mana sweepers. Because if you know to get ahead of Hoof, if they're going to try and kill you on turn 4, if I'm on the draw and I have Wrath that turn, that's going to be too late. Yeah. So I'm gonna lean towards a Pyroclasm deck. Whereas if I know I'm in mid-range, I'm probably fine to play Acceleration or Cantrips on turn 1 or turn 2, and then Wrath them on turn 4 when I can get the most value out of it. So like that sort of sliding scale as to what type of deck you want to pay on. And this goes into a great point that Liam raised in the notes, which is where do you start building your deck and shaping it to the meta? Where do you start putting in your cheaper 1-for-1 cards, and then when do you start trying to land your 2-for-1 cards, your card advantage cards? Because control is all about that card advantage.
Yeah, like so, and it's sort of it's about, there are some archetypes that when you play against, you just need to be able to interact cheaply, and quite sensibly, Wizards doesn't design cards that are both cheap and good with card advantage, right? They're not printing lightning bolt that cantrips because that would be unfair. But there are cards like Electrolyze, which cost 3 mana, that can kill a thing and also or 2 things, right? And can often get you ahead, will get you ahead on cards as well as being interactive. And so, actually, Serge, I think you've already done a reasonable job of summing up where that sliding scale fits. If you think you need to beat a lot of the aggro decks, if you think the format is fast currently, you're probably going to lean towards playing more cheap interaction and then pulling ahead of the game, ahead in the game at the end by landing something really expensive that closes the game. Whereas if you think the format is way more mid-range focused, I'm way more inclined to play my Electrolyzes, my Kolagons, Commands, cards that are a little slower. And in the case of the Electrolyze Lightning Bolt example, I mean, Electrolyze doesn't even kill a 3 toughness creature, right? It's not quite as powerful per se, but from a strict value standpoint, it's gonna be a lot more valuable. So I think that, yeah, it all sort of depends. Like if there's more control, more mid-range, you want more 2-for-1s, want more card advantage cards. If there's a lot of aggro or a lot of combo as well, like against combo, it doesn't matter if you're actually playing it at card neutrality, as long as you can sort of stop them from doing their thing and then present a clock. Like you can win the game with 0 cards in hand as control as long as you actually kill them before they kill you. Yeah.
Let's talk about when you're control deck, when you're trying to figure out how much removal or interaction you put into the deck. Because again, the whole point of the control deck is to interact. You're not a control deck if you're not interacting.
Unless you're prison.
Why?
I'm just throwing you under the bus.
Like you are interacting. It's a form of meta interaction, Alex.
Just like when you pose the question, would you like to continue playing Magic? And they're like, please, and you're like, no.
You can just go get a sandwich. My turn is going to take a couple
Then
minutes.
you just laugh. Yeah, again, it's about what kind of removal you want to play. So you're always going to play the best removal spells in whatever colors you're playing. So if you're playing white in your control deck, I mean, you're basically always playing Swords and Path.
Yeah.
And then some of the interesting discussions can be about how deep you go. So in like the blue-white control deck, for instance, people have played cards like Declaration in Stone, the one in a white exile a creature, and all other creatures with the same name, they get a clue for each non-token creature exiled this way.
Unexpectedly Absent is pretty hot.
Yeah. That card's good.
Council's
Council's
Judgment.
Oh,
Yeah.
Council's Judgment answers so much.
One I've been really impressed with recently is Blessed Alliance.
Yeah, Blessed Alliance is really sweet.
I don't know that card.
I don't know
It's
that card.
one in a white instant. It's modal. It's either target player gains 4, untap up to
Really?
2, target opponent sacrifices an attacking creature, and it's got Escalate too, which is basically multi-kicker for like maximum number of modes, and you can't choose the same one twice. So it's like
This card came out like a year ago, and now it's seeing play?
More than a year.
I've been playing it basically since it came out.
Huh.
But
Interesting. Maybe this is another best card you're not playing.
This card's kind of sweet. I had a situation where I was playing like a 4-color control deck, and I cast Diabolic Edict early in the game.
Yeah.
And my opponent on hoof was like, well, the Diabolic Edict's gone. Like, this Merit Ledge that I'm going to make is probably going to stick. And so he made a Merit Ledge and attacked me with me, and then I Blessed Alliance him, and he had to sacrifice his Merit Ledge. And
That sounds like an early powerful magic, but it's pretty good.
This is better than just a regular edict, because
Yeah.
often they'll have extra creatures that can't necessarily attack profitably. But this gets an attacking creature, so if they only have the one attacking creature, that is the current problem. This gets that one.
Huh.
You can also do some neat tricks where if they attack with their non-effective creatures, and you're not going to die from taking lethal damage, or you can chump block, you can cast this after damage, after their other creatures have died, and then it's still an attacking creature until the end of combat.
Yeah.
So you can cast it after all their chump attackers have
Yeah,
died.
after all the blockers have died. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like Maze of Ith, you
Okay,
can,
that
at the very,
timing
very
I was
end.
not aware of.
yeah, you
yeah.
can cast it in the combat damage step.
Yeah, this card's pretty tricky, and you can do some sweet stuff like before blocks, untap my 2 blockers, you sack an attacking
Yeah,
creature.
that's why I was
block
playing
your
it in this
things,
deck.
Like
Have you never done the trick where you attack with a creature, have it do a combat damage, and then Maze of Ith your own creature, so it's a blocker next turn if it has like lifelink, and that's more relevant than mazing their dude?
also the classic one is with Knight of the Reliquary. You get to attack and block and activate your knight all in one turn with Maze.
Yeah, it's pretty sweet. But so when we're talking about like how deep you go in the removal, Blessed Alliance is actually a card that like I don't know, maybe it should move up, but it's kind of interesting, right? We had the meme going on for a little while about tier lists, but this is actually like where you sort of need to mentally have a sort of pseudo tier list for the various different types of cards you want to be playing. And you just pick from there, right? You decide how many of them you're going to play based on where you want to slant your deck.
And I also think control, more than almost any other archetype, comes down to personal preference and play style based on whether you want to play it more tap out or more reactive. And that'll also determine, like, personal preference also determines what removal you want to play and how much removal you want to play. Like, control is probably the most, like, personalizable archetype, in my opinion.
A neat example between that would be if you're playing blue-white control. You could play Counterspell or you could play Oblivion Ring. And so that's 2 answers to the same thing, because both of those are fairly broad in what they answer, but it's 2 very different approaches. They have 2 different mana costs, they go in 2 different strategies, and they're both powerful answers to something.
I mean, timing is another thing.
Yeah, when you play it, how does it fit into your strategy? Does it complement what you're doing or not? Let's talk about a really important part of a control deck. How does it win? Right? Because we've talked about stopping what your opponent does, but at some point you need to end the game for you to win. And the 3 classic ones are combo, card advantage. That's not really a win con, but it leads to it. Or just like a big idiot threat, be it a planeswalker or a huge creature.
Yeah, and I added card advantage as a win condition actually, so that we could dispel the myth that you can win by card advantage, because you do actually need a way to win the game.
Yeah.
Right. Like the I'm going to have 7 cards in hand for the entire game does not matter if you can't kill them. you have to find a way to kill them eventually, whether
Trinket
that's by
Mage gets
decking or some other system.
Sometimes just showing your hand of 7 counterspells when your opponent's hellbent is enough to get them to concede, which is a win condition.
But they probably shouldn't, right?
My favorite win con in the control deck is you like accidentally resolve a Trinket Mage on turn 3.
Oh, yeah,
and then
yeah.
you just slowly kill them over 10 turns while like counterspells are flying everywhere, and this Trinket Mage
I was
is
gonna
just
say
like,
it, and
am I gonna really get there?
the card advantage win conditions are like secretly like Snapcaster Mage and,
Yeah.
and
Yeah, yeah.
Mishra's Factory and
Yeah,
like Fairy
something
Conclave,
smaller.
like those
Vendilion
things.
Click is really good in
Yeah.
that kind of
Yeah.
game plan.
It's just like you just have enough cards that like you can resolve this Snapcaster Mage on turn 8, flashback your Dig Through Time, and like they're never gonna have a window to remove your Snapcaster Mage or make any other bigger impact on the board.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess the kind of combos you can win with are your typical sort of like two
Two-card
ones.
combos,
It's like,
yeah.
Painter
Servant Grindstone.
Painter Servant Grindstone, Rest in Peace, Helm of Obedience. Even stuff like
Like Time Vault is a pretty classic.
Thopter Sword.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
Splinter Twin.
Splinter Twin.
Scape Shift is one of the classic
Yeah.
combo control decks
Yep.
where
Yep.
like they're just looking to control the game and then
Went out of nowhere.
like
Cast
just like
it, escape
get to
a
7
sheath.
lands, cast a 4-drop sorcery that kills your opponent.
If you're familiar with the more standard control deck as well, it's often in the form of a 4 to 6 mana Planeswalker or a large creature. So standard ones in our format are Consecrated Sphinx, Wormcoil Engine, Jace the Mind Sculptor.
more so Torrential Gearhulk is like
Torrential Gearhulk's a new one.
6 mana.
Yeah,
Flash is-
Snapcaster.
Flash is
Snapcaster
so
Shooter.
nice.
Yeah.
There's other stuff like Tombstalker can be played as
Sure.
as a win con.
Yeah,
sometimes.
Tassiger is another really good one.
Yeah,
But,
Tassiger is
but it's
pretty
worth mentioning, as we said before, that sometimes your win con is resolving an early threat and protecting it, but very differently than
Yeah,
sort of a
it's not-
tempo deck would.
Yeah, it's not the same as a tempo deck where it's just like sometimes that's sort of incidental. Like you
Yeah.
said, it's like I just stick this, this Trinket Mage, and in the process of preventing you from doing anything, I do that so well that this little 2 damage clock actually becomes a
Yeah.
threat over
Yeah,
time.
but lots of time, like say when Tempo resolves a turn 3 threat, they're like force of willing your next card, unsummoning another one, countering it on the way back down. Whereas like Control, if you play like a 3 mana creature, chances are if your opponent tries to kill it, you're just like, yeah,
Okay.
Yeah, it's
sweet,
like, block
get it
your
out of
Trinket
here.
Mage,
Like
don't care.
already got value.
Yeah, like,
You're
depending
holding on
on
to
the
your
matchup.
Wormcoil, and you're just like, sure.
You're like often like chump blocking, then wrathing the next turn. Like
Yeah.
Well, the funny thing in those matchups too is it can be like, you have your 2/2 in play, and they play a 4-mana creature, and you're just like, oh, Oblivion Ring, that one thing, and they're like, oh, that's awkward, and you hit them for 2, and then they play a Planeswalker, and you counter their Planeswalker, and they're like, and you.
Yeah. There has been a shift recently too, which I think is quite interesting, where it used to be that most of the control finishers were between 4 and 6 mana,
Yep.
typically a little bit higher. And now, like the blue-red, like the Blue Moon deck, and also there's been a blue-white control deck that's been kind of popular. That have been popping up that have been playing like much cheaper win conditions that are kind of interesting. So like the blue-white control deck was playing cards like Hero of Bladehold and Brimaz,
Yeah,
King of
great
Oreskos,
cards, great
as way to
cards.
end the game, ways to end the game really quickly.
They
and
can
then-
win the game in 3 turns,
Right,
right?
exactly. Which is kind of nice. It lets you turn the corner really quickly, is the theory. Like you can play it on turn 6 and know that the game is over by turn 8. With in the case of Hero, right? You like play it on turn 6 with a counterspell backup. You stop them from doing a thing. You attack them, and all you have to do is prevent them from killing you, from doing something meaningful for the next two turns, and it's going to be over. The other good example is in the Blue Moon deck. Robin Sorensen, who's been playing the deck a lot, and I were talking. We played the Blue Moon Mirror a couple weeks ago, which we finished first out of the round, by the way, I will note. So Control does not have to go to time when you bribery your opponent's Frost Titan.
Oh man, that boy's getting played.
Yep, not in my deck. I was playing the bribery, but
I missed that. I missed that card.
yeah, it's
Titan.
great.
I mean, I don't miss having it played against because it's a pain, but
Yeah, it's really good. But what Robin was saying was actually the best draws in the Blue Moon deck, which is a control deck, are the ones with Young Pyromancer. When you play Young Pyromancer on turn 2, and you just get to like
counter everything.
right,
and just
yeah,
get more and
because
more
the game just
damage.
ends so much
Yeah,
faster.
or even what's that stupid thing in the ice?
Yep, that one's good too.
Yeah, just another great control card. It protects you early and very quickly ends the game once it's online.
Jared, I had a really funny game where you were playing a combo deck and I was playing a control deck, and I played turn 2 Thing in the Ice in the first game after mulliganing a bunch of times. And Jerry, you were like, well, that's got to be good for me if that's your plan, because like we didn't know, or Jared didn't know what deck I was on, but I knew what deck he was on, and I was sitting there thinking like, no, this 7/8 that's going to be a 7/8 in 2 turns is literally the best thing I can be doing in this matchup.
Cool.
And I like won that game and then lost the other 2 quite soundly.
Yep.
Let's talk about mana. Sort of like the last point we have in you want to build a control deck is the mana base is pretty different in a control deck compared to most decks. And not just mana, but mana sources. So are you playing mana rocks? Like how do you do that math?
Yeah. There's like a hard number, which I think for most control decks you want to be around 40.
That's the exact number I was gonna say.
Like 40 lands or 40 sources?
40 sources.
40 sources, and for the most part, people have started shifting away from mana rocks just because of the need to interact early. Like, the format's got a lot faster over the past 5 years, and like 5 years ago, you were like probably fine to plan to play a mana rock on 2, and then Wrath on turn 3 if needed. But now you're just gonna get like Planeswalkered. It's like
You gotta hold that counterspell up on turn 2.
It's just like tapping it on turn 2 is just such a liability. Like the threats are just so diverse and so like sticky that like you can't necessarily plan to 1-for-1 everything anymore, or they're gonna play like 2 things that are both a pain. Like they're gonna play like Thalia and Mother of Runes, and then you're like, oh god.
or worst case, like I mean, Reclamation Sage getting printed is really archetypal of like the problem with playing a bunch of mana rocks is like there's now just a bunch of incidental hate. It used to be that you would play a Signet or a Talisman and like your Signet or Talisman was probably gonna stick around for a while. And now it's like there's enough just like incidental removal for those sorts of things that you're setting yourself up to get blown out potentially.
Yeah.
That always feels kind of bad.
And so like mostly 40 lands, but especially if you're a 2-color deck, you do get to play a bunch of utility lands that will help mitigate flooding. Like you're going to play the creature land. In blue-red, you're going to play Desolate Lighthouse, which lets you
You play the Loot House?
Oh yeah, the Loot House.
I
is
haven't
sick.
seen
that card's super great.
because so many people play Blue Moon and they're trying to punish people. I haven't seen the Loot House in a really long time.
played
But
in Blue
that
Moon.
that card
Yeah.
is in Blue Moon.
Yep.
Really?
Yeah, I have a
it's
foil
really
for
good.
exactly this purpose.
Oh man, I love that card.
I just picked up
really-
a copy of this card.
really
I think Throne of the High City is a really underplayed card right now. That's a really good utility land.
I don't
To
even
just
know what that
briefly
card
explain
does.
Desolate Lighthouse, it taps for 1 colorless, and for 1 blue-red tap, you loot. You draw a card, discard a card. Just like sort of late game, it's another.
That's great to get rid of excess lands.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's just
definitely.
like turn your lands into gas.
And then Throne of the High City is a land that taps for a colorless, and for 4 and sacking
I
it,
think I need one of these.
you can become the monarch. So what's really great about this one is that if it's a game, like if it's a control mirror, this card is insane because you get to introduce the monarchy, and people in control mirrors are not good at taking the throne. And if it's a matchup where like introducing the monarchy is bad, you just don't have to. You
Exactly.
just have a colorless land instead.
Can you just remind, for those unfamiliar with Conspiracy 2, what the Monarch is?
Right. Yes.
monarch-
Of course.
Judge?
When it's introduced, the player who is the monarch gets to draw a card in their end step.
You need to wear a suit crown.
Each end step. But if you take combat damage, you have to relinquish it to the player who dealt you
It's
dealt
kind
you
of
combat
like an
damage.
emblem that can change ownership.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's pretty much exactly what it is. There's currently no way to interact with it, so you can't remove it in any other way other than
Yeah.
becoming the monarch.
It's a status that enters into existence in the game if a card specifically references it.
Yeah.
So like Marchesa,
Palace
Palace
Jailer,
Jailer.
Palace
most
Jailer,
played one.
this card will all say like you become the monarch, and then like that status enters the game and then becomes something that both players can potentially possess.
I actually think the introduction of the monarchy to Magic has had a massive impact on the way you have to build your control deck.
I agree.
Because it used to be that you could build control decks with not a whole lot of win conditions, and now if you don't have ways to
At least
to win
hurt
the
them a
game
little, yeah.
or hurt them a little, like there are so many decks that are just playing Palace Jailer that just if you ever tap out and they just get to play a Palace Jailer, they don't need to exile a creature. If they just become the monarch, they have a one-sided Howling Mine for the entire game. Like
It's pretty hard to beat.
Right, it happened to me at the Staples event this weekend. Like
Yeah.
I was playing a sort of pseudo control deck, and my opponent became the monarch at some point in the game, and I lost. And I was really far ahead before that, and I just couldn't beat one-sided Howling Mine.
Did you know that Palace Jailer is a completely insane card in this format?
Yeah, we may as well talk about this really
It's
quick.
super, super good.
Palace Jailer is a 4-mana 2/2. Costs 2 white, is a human soldier. And you're like, why would I play a 4-mana 2/2? Well, when it enters the battlefield, you become the monarch.
Already good.
And when it enters the battlefield, exile target creature an opponent controls until they become the monarch, or until an opponent becomes a monarch. So
Yeah.
even if they wrath this, if they don't hit you, you keep being the monarch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This
And-
card
This
is
is a
their-
little
their
bit
card
like
stays in
the sort
exile.
of like Fiend Hunter effects, except that
it's the best
removing
one
this
not
creature
close.
doesn't matter.
Yeah, this card is very, very strong. And just as a side note, Monarch is actually kind of a surprising pain in competitive Magic, and like who actually controls it and triggers and
Oh,
remembering
yeah,
if it
like
doesn't
when-
get
like
passed
when
back
if-
and forth.
If you get hit, it's your trigger to remember to give it to your opponent.
Yeah, they don't have to remember to take it. You have to
You have
remember
to give them the
give
turn.
it to them.
Yeah.
And then especially for effects like this, where they get their creature back once they become the monarch, then
Oh,
it
wow.
becomes a
Yeah,
giant
yeah.
mess. I've had more calls because of Palace Jailer than I like to admit.
So if I'm the monarch and
Yep.
my opponent hits me,
Yep.
and I forget to say, "Oh, you're the monarch now," then that's a game rule violation against me.
It's a miss trigger,
Okay,
and you're going to get a warning.
Yeah,
right.
But
But
if you get 3 of those, it's
three
a
of
game
those,
loss.
that's a game loss. Yeah.
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 That's why you need a physical crown.
Well, they
There's
printed,
a token.
They printed cards that's like the monarch, and it tells you what the monarch does.
That's the
Yeah.
one, the token with the typo
Yes.
Oh no, does it?
Yes.
Yeah.
at the beginning of you end step,
Oh,
or whatever it
no.
is.
It's not good.
All right. Well, let's move this on. So we
Now let's
talked
get back
about-
to mana sources really quick.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow, we went way off the rails. Mana sources. If you play Mana Rocks, how do you do the math? Personally.
So you want 40 sources, and as Jared was mentioning with utility lands, I would count Mana Rocks and other mana sources like Soul Ring as 1. Even Soul Ring, which makes 2 mana, I still only really count it as
I agree.
1.
So you can replace a land with it.
You can,
a certain point.
to a certain degree. There's like obviously you need a certain threshold of lands. I wouldn't go lower than like 36, 37, I think.
Okay.
But if you're playing some rocks, you can go a little bit down. Also, if you're playing utility lands, if your utility land doesn't produce mana,
For example, Maze of Ith.
Maze of Ith,
Doesn't
yeah,
count as a land.
don't count it as a mana source. If your utility land produces mana, but you might sacrifice it, like Throne of the High City, or in particular Wasteland is the biggest culprit for this. I count it as a half.
I think you can count Throne as 1.
I think you can too,
pretty
but
safely.
with Wasteland, I think you're counting. You should
I
count
was
it as a
actually
half.
going to bring this up as well. That
Yeah.
it's a concept we've brought up before, but like Wasteland and
forget
Strip
that.
Mine in control decks especially, you should not count as a full mana source.
No. And similarly, I wouldn't count if you're really spending the big bucks and playing your Library of Alexandria. I think that I don't know if I would hard count that as a half, but it's
It
one.
taps for mana.
It does tap for mana, but like you
I've
don't
played
always
it quite a
want-
bit, and I count it as 1.
Sure, but that's another one that you want to like think about.
Yeah.
All right, let's move.
One other thing I was going to mention is that if you play a bunch of 1 mana cantrips, you can actually lower your land count if you play a high enough density of these. Like the blue control decks, just out of like color privilege, I guess, because they get to play these like cheap card selection spells, get to play less lands on average than non-blue control decks.
Because you can just filter.
Or fewer mana sources. Maybe
Fewer
more
mana
accurately.
sources, not necessarily lands.
Yeah.
Let's talk about why to play Control. I like to play it because sometimes it feels powerful, or if you want to try and really guess what the meta is going to be, because it's a deck that's laser guided, in my opinion, to beat something. Or if I'm feeling particularly mean and I just want to sleeve up prison.
Like you want the if there's a visual for what it looks like winning with this deck, control is going to be like you sort of like slouch back in your throne with like a goblet of your opponent's blood, just like laughing as their city
The
burns.
counterspell guy.
I was thinking you're like holding your opponent's head back and they're like trying to run
like,
forward. And they're like, no. I think the other reason to play Control is, like Jeremy said earlier, you get to personalize these decks maybe more than any other one. So, like, if you want to play a bunch of Charms and Locust God in your deck, you totally can.
Unbeatable Locust God.
I mean, that card's unbeatable when it resolves. That part's the challenge. But but like so, there's a lot of flexibility for personal choice and playing like typically when you look at a control deck in any color combination, there's probably like 30 or 40 cards you quote should be playing. But then there's like 20 cards that are totally customizable according to what you want to do, which is pretty fun.
And I think because the games are like elongated and drawn out so much, the choices you make actually matter more than in most other decks, because you're going to get to you're going to get to see those cards more often.
One of the worst things personally I feel when playing Control is when you make a mistake and you're like, I actually lost this game 6 turns ago when I messed up with this one line, and you can just feel a mistake compound over and over.
Snowball.
Yeah, and so it's challenging to play, and that can be great. It can be super rewarding if you execute it perfectly, because Control can be challenging knowing, can I let that resolve, or do I have a different answer in my deck? Because some things, especially when we go through your hierarchy of counterspells, a lot of counterspells are situational. Negate.
Or if you have a counter spell and a removal spell and they're playing a threat and you're like, man, which one do I use?
Right?
Like, because like the next thing they play might not be counterspellable, it might not be removable.
Or you let it resolve and then they have an answer for your removal.
Yeah.
And that feels bad. So it can be really interesting.
I think, too, one of the reasons we left Control for last, like you'll note, we've talked about all the other archetypes first, and
The
now
major archetypes.
Yeah, sure. But we've talked about the big archetypes, and we're talking about Control last. Is that it's the deck that both requires and rewards knowing how the other decks in the format work the best. Because it's much easier to make that choice about removal spell or counter spell if you know what the other things that your opponent could be bringing to the table are. And so, as a result, if you're someone who really likes looking at a lot of deck lists and poring over a lot of data, Control is an archetype that can really reward you for doing that kind of out-of-game research.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And this is sort of what I was hinting before. This is a great archetype to sort of leverage the longer you've been playing over people who might not be as familiar.
Well, yeah, it's just because the amount of decisions you get to make in Control is so great, and just by playing Control, you're forcing your opponent to play a longer game and make many more decisions. So
Give them a chance to make a mistake.
Yeah, if you think on average you're going to make less mistakes playing this type of game than your opponent, it might be a good deck for you.
All right, and in the sake of balance, why should you not play Control?
There's a bunch of reasons.
Well, we'll get to them.
You can start. No, go for it.
Okay. Well, sometimes you will end up playing for a really, really, really long time.
You want breaks between rounds?
Yeah. There was a comment that we unfortunately didn't get to
I loved it.
on the previous episode about aggro, which
Yeah.
was one of the most compelling reasons to play aggro, which is, do you
get to
want to
go
get a
get
lunch break
food.
between rounds because you finish in 20 minutes?
Yeah. Either way, you either win or you lose, but it ends fast.
Yeah.
Look, there's a reason Jeremy and I have a well-developed system of who plays the aggro deck and who plays the control deck every big tournament, because one of us has to go get the other one food.
It's true.
All these things in balance.
Yeah. One tricky thing with a control deck is if you're guiding yourself in to crush one matchup and you hit a bad matchup, that can go pretty bad. So you very rarely have a great matchup against everything. You have your one good matchup, you have very few insane matchups, which I think is kind of fair. Like if you're a combo deck and you walk in, or you're a reanimator deck and you're just like, oh, I'm against goblins, Elish Nor, and GG.
Yeah, just
And
like
it's
free
over.
wins.
And one thing that can be tough is the games you win feel like you often like had to fight forever, and like you had to make so many decisions, and then you like eventually got control of the game, and then like sort of smooth sailing from there. But you like had to put a lot of mental energy in to win that game. And the games you lose, you quite often just get like run over, and it just
Yeah.
like didn't matter what you did.
Or like
So-
it can be frustrating because you can lose randomly sometimes, right? Like you tap out because they're empty-handed and they top deck the Planeswalker that you don't have a way to interact with, and you die, and it's like very frustrating to have that happen to you.
Yeah,
Yeah, or
you're
like
doing
the-
super well.
The one turn you tap out, they untap and play Hazaret, and it's just like
Yeah,
the
that's
most
a great
insane, like
example.
unbeatable
Beep, beep.
threat. Like it's an indestructible creature that doesn't need to attack to win.
Yeah.
And
Ugh.
it's just like
It wins
controls
through mode.
versus
It wins
exactly.
through mode.
You like have moat in play, you have a counter spell, but you're like, oh, I'm just gonna like put this Elspeth Knight Errant in play to try to get a clock on now that I have like sort of stabilized. That's like the classic.
I clearly don't know what Hazaret does. Can you tell me about this card? Because
It's
I don't remember
insane.
it being that good.
Standard All-Star.
it's-
Highlander, soon to be All-Star.
It's
Because I know
This
the
card is
Scorpion
like-
God is nuts, but Hazaret really?
no, Scarab God is nuts.
Pardon me.
This card is 3 and a red for a 5/4 with indestructible and haste. It can't attack or block unless you have one or fewer cards in hand. So you have to be heck bent is the card, the phrasing people are using. And you can pay 2 and a red, discard a card, and Hazoret deals 2 damage to each opponent.
Really, this is bonkers.
So she puts herself online, but sometimes you'll just curve out into this and get him.
We can play her in big red.
Yeah, definitely.
Yep.
She lives through wildfire. Except then you end up with a bunch of cards in hand after because you blow up all your lands, but...
You have mana rocks, you discard them. It's fine.
This card is so brutally
But
efficient.
Serge, it doesn't matter if you have a bunch of cards in hand.
it
you
ends-
just snug them.
It's a 4-drop that ends the game in 3 turns.
Woof.
Yeah.
There are not, like we were talking about Hero Bladehold that does that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
This is a card that does that and is much harder to remove than Hero Bladehold.
I need a copy of this.
Yeah.
So that's the irritating thing with playing control sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes
you
You
just lose
sometimes
the
just
Hazoret.
randomly lose because they resolve the Hazoret, you tapped out, your hand is all counter spells, they resolve this, and now you still have all counter spells in hand, and you're thinking, well, I couldn't lose the game, and now I am.
All right,
Yeah, and-
my number one favorite card in Control, sorry, just because it's super, super relevant, and I think this card is even better than Maze of Ith sometimes, is Caracas. That card is insane. I highly recommend you put it in every Control deck, regardless if it has white in it.
I will go a step further. Like I've been seeing this card recent. Like I was playing with this card a bunch. You can actually jam this in almost any deck. Like I've seen decks that do not have access to white sources playing this.
Jared disagrees.
And that's nuts.
Yeah, I know. I also disagree.
Really? This card's so good. It answers Merit Lodge.
It's good, but it also is a colorless land in a lot of decks. And
Yeah,
Yeah.
the cost of playing colorless utility lands or off-color utility lands, which are essentially the same thing, is pretty high in your decks. And I think you want them to be online and impactful more often than not when you draw them.
That's fair.
And I think it should be in virtually every white deck. I
Yeah,
would
it's like if you have
certainly
access to
concede
white-
that card is good.
Jam this in.
Let me really quickly, just because I forgot to mention, for those of you who don't have the video version, Caracas is a land, a legendary land. It taps for white, or tap and return a legendary creature to its owner's hand. Sorry for the interrupting.
Yeah,
just want to
no,
give the context on
No
that card.
worries. So it certainly has a lot of utility, but my issue is you can just still get like ran over by aggro. They don't play many relevant
Yeah, like it's
legendary
great
creatures.
against the Zergo Bell Striker Carry-Zev curve, but there are lots of curves that do similar amounts of damage that aren't those
That's
cards.
fair.
Yeah,
No, that's fair.
and just like the times you draw hands with like an off-color land where it's like super crucial.
That's the difference between
It's
a keep
like-
and a mulligan.
Yeah.
That's fair.
And it's also not like a land drop is free in a lot of decks, right? Like developing a colorless land or an off-color land, like often means that you can't cast your spells on time or
All
whatever in
right.
some
I
decks.
still stand by my decision, but it is risky. For those of you building a desk at home, Caracas, maybe.
I think
How
Caracas
handy
is
would
a
it go?
classic example of a card that is really good when it's good and not memorable when it's bad. And so as a result, people tend to think of it as this
Are
insane...
you telling me I'm biased?
Yes, I'm telling you that you have confirmation bias, and I think that that's true of a lot of cards.
And
in
there are
Highlander.
definitely lots of people in the community who hold the same opinion as Serge that you should put it in every deck. So
And like, it's not totally unreasonable. Like Blue Moon has played this card before. It's a reasonable
It's
card.
like certainly not
It
real
is-
ridiculous to
Yeah.
do so.
It is insanity when it's good.
So let's start wrapping things up a little bit. Anybody have any important notes, any closing statements on Control?
Get them.
I've got one, which is, it's a great archetype. It's a powerful archetype, but sometimes you'll be goozled if you don't pick the right deck for the right meta.
It's sort of a like backwards thinking, but I almost think one of the best ways to like get in a Noah format is to start playing Control, just because it forces you to think about what your opponent's doing so much. That's how I started playing Highlander.
you
So
also
I'm
get
like,
to see
I'm
more of games.
sort of biased, but yeah, it like it makes it super clear like when you mess up versus a deck. Like if you counter the wrong thing, and then you like talk to your opponent after, and they're like, yeah, you countered the wrong thing. You can be like, sweet,
Now I know.
I'll counter the right thing next time. And it just like is very easy to improve and learn about different decks other than your own playing Control.
I have one other side note about playing Control. If you're going to play Control, playing Control and playing slowly are not the same thing. Please, if you want to play Control decks, that's great, but please make an effort to play at a reasonable pace.
That's fair.
Definitely.
We'll
Just-
call you on slow play.
Well, exactly. But even if you're just playing with your friends, right? Like,
Yeah.
there's nothing more likely to destroy a friendship than someone who takes 1 minute every turn in a game that they can never lose.
Yeah.
Right? Like, we don't need this game that I can never win to be 50 minutes. It can be 15. That's okay.
All right, well, let's move on to our closing segment. As always, it's time for Powerful Magic. Up today, we've got Jer. Jer, I want to hear your story.
All right. I'm going to do something different here and talk about a story where one of us comes out ahead.
Whoa!
Not just sick blow-ups.
Yeah.
The story last week was someone coming out ahead. It was fine.
All right.
We're
By
about 75-25
So
at this point.
I was playing against a good friend of the show, Allison, on her rock deck. I was playing blue-red tempo, and it was not looking good for me. I'll set the scene a bit.
Oh, no.
She has a million lands in play, a Sylvan Library, 2 creatures, I think a Thragtusk and a Beast token. I'm at 9. I have a Jace on 7.
Which Jace?
The Mind Sculptor.
Nice. Okay.
I have 8 lands, including a fetch land, and it's her turn. She's pondering whether or not to kill my Jace, which
Or
would
you.
take all her creatures, or hit me down to 1 and lock my fetch land out. She chose to hit me down to 1. I have a lonely card in hand, and all my mana's untapped, and I've been not doing anything. It was probably land. So I untap, draw a card, brainstorm with Jace, and I find Infiltrator Ilkor.
I don't know what that card does.
Not many people do.
Okay.
It's a 4 and a blue for a 3/1 with Shadow. Well, it also suspends for 1 and a blue. That's mostly why it's good.
That's why you put it in the deck.
Suspend
So you can
2 for
Fury
1 and a
Charm it
blue.
into play. It's not actually why.
I did not play Fairy
I've
Charm.
never seen this card played, but go on. Okay.
Yes.
So you draw a shadow creature.
I draw a Shadow creature and Time Walk. So I cast.
Oh, no.
She's also at 18 when she's making this choice. She is not at a low life total,
Okay.
and I have
Get
no
ready.
creature in play.
Do you know the story?
Yes.
Oh
So
my
I
goodness,
cast
okay.
Infiltrator Ilkor, and I cast Time Walk.
Wow,
Because
okay.
it seemed like the thing to do at the
And
time.
she's like, okay.
Yes, she's like, okay, whatever. You have a 3/1, and she had a Wall of Roots in play. So,
Your
like-
creature is shadow.
Yeah, but my creature has Shadow, and then I untap, draw a card. I knew it was bad because I put it back with Brainstorm. Brainstorm again, and I find Rune Chanter's Pike.
All right, so Rune Chanter's Pike. So our creature is a 3/1 with shadow. Now
Yeah.
we have Rune Chanter's
Rune
Pike.
Chanter's Pike. It's 2 mana, 2 to equip. Equipped creature has first strike and +X/+O, where X is the number of instant and sorcery cards in my graveyard.
Wow, okay.
Now, when the blue-red tempo deck gets to 8 lands in play, this game has probably gone on for a while.
Yeah.
I had 26 instant or
Whoa!
sorceries in my graveyard. And the look on Allison's face was priceless when I'm like, play Rune Chanter's Pike, equip, attack
for
with my shadow
29?
creature past your wall. And she was just like flabbergasted. And
This is what we're talking about. When a control deck loses out of nowhere, you're like, my opponent's at 1. I've locked him out of a fetch land. I can't lose this game.
You go from 18 to -8 in
Oh,
one turn.
oh, I feel so bad for her.
So if that's the kind of thing that would tilt you off the planet, don't play Control.
or just don't play against me.
So that's our episode for today.
Play Rune Chanter's Pike.
That card's insane.
Thank you very much for watching. If you've got any questions you want to do, that's our major series for Let's Talk About. So if you got some ideas and something you'd love to see us talk about, let us know down below in the comments. As always, this episode is brought to you by you. Through your support at the Patreon at patreon.com/LoadingReadyRun. Thanks so much for watching, and thanks to everybody for being here.
Yeah.
Have a good one.